Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever been, say, walking down a grocery aisle or maybe just mindlessly scrolling through your social media feed or even watching a news broadcast and you just get this creeping suspicion that your reality is being filtered? Like you absolutely aren't getting the whole picture? Well, today we're exploring a fascinating explainer on living in low reality levels. We're drawing from a really compelling piece published in BBB magazine, and it actually puts a specific name to exactly that feeling.
Don't worry, we are embarking on a very structured journey today. We're going to peel the onion, starting from deep philosophy all the way down to the food you eat and the internet you browse. We'll define what these levels are, look at the philosophy behind them, spot the illusions in our daily lives, discuss the actual dangers, figure out how to escape the frame, and finally, look at what's called a sovereign diagnostic tool.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, defining low reality levels and the concept of the curated perception, because we really need to understand the core concept here before we can look at its impact.
So, by definition, low reality levels are environments where perception is curated, filtered, and controlled, leaving individuals with only partial access to truth. Now, I really want to emphasize that phrase right there, partial access to truth. You see, BBB magazine doesn't describe this as just some random glitch in our modern world. Nope, it's described as a deliberate, modern social simulation. Basically, it's an environment where what you experience is a carefully managed, hyper-filtered version of reality.
Moving on to Section 2, the philosophy of simulation and the roots of hyperreality. Now, this concept sounds a little sci-fi, but it actually has deep, deep intellectual roots.
When you hear social simulation, you probably picture people plugged into giant, glowing computer mainframes, right? But the evolution of this idea starts way, way back in the ancient era with Plato's cave. That's the famous allegory where prisoners, chained in a cave, mistake shadows cast on a wall for actual reality, simply because, well, it's the only curated system they've ever known. Fast forward a bit to the 20th century, and we hit Jean Baudrillard's concept of hyperreality. This is where signs and representations completely replace reality itself. Think about how a flashy ad for a burger somehow becomes more real to us than the actual soggy burger you get at the drive-thru. And finally, we arrive at the modern era with simulation theory. This is the idea that modern governments and corporations actively simulate reality by controlling our perception. The technology gets an upgrade, sure, but the core mechanism of control, that remains exactly the same.
And this brilliantly illustrates the whole concept. Signs replace truth. Shadows replace light. Illusions replace reality. It's incredibly profound, really. When the shadow on the wall is literally the only thing you are allowed to see, you inevitably forget that the light even exists in the first place. This perfectly bridges the gap between that abstract academic philosophy and our modern condition.
So, let's get practical. Section 3, illusions in daily life, and how this actually manifests in the real world. Because this isn't science fiction, folks. It is happening right now in your daily routines.
Let's just walk through how this plays out day to day. First up, algorithmic curation and internet filtering. Whether we're talking about China's Great Firewall blocking access entirely, or US algorithms spoon-feeding you highly targeted content, the underlying reality is exactly the same: fragmented truths. We're only ever seeing a tiny slice of the pie. Then, look at the grocery store. We are constantly sold premium marketed processed foods, you know, the ones with the gorgeous, vibrant packaging. But the reality? It's nutritional degradation. The supposed excellence of the food is entirely simulated. And zooming out to a macro level, nations constantly broadcast this advertised freedom and prosperity to the globe. But let's be real, this often just serves to conceal deep systemic flaws. So the algorithms, the grocery aisles, the national PR, these are quite literally acting as the invisible walls of our simulation.
Which brings us to a pretty critical question in Section 4, the danger of the illusion. What actually happens when a society mistakes these manufactured illusions for reality?
So the crucial point is that the result of this simulation is systemic degradation. We're talking specifically about the degradation of our health, our intellect, and our culture. Think about it. When we eat simulated nutrition, our physical bodies suffer. When we consume fragmented truths spit out by internet filters, our intellect narrows. And when we mistake advertised prosperity for actual genuine freedom, our culture decays. Living in a low reality level actively, aggressively erodes our physical and mental well-being. And honestly, the most striking takeaway here is that none of this requires advanced, futuristic technology. Not at all. It just requires control over what we perceive.
All right, let's pivot from the dystopian critique to something far more empowering. Section 5, escaping the curated frame and finding pathways to higher truth.
I really want to pose this directly to you. How do we escape this simulation? If the walls holding us in are just invisible algorithms and clever grocery store marketing, how do we actually find the door?
Well, the source material gives us 3 extremely actionable steps to break outside: travel, education, and critical inquiry. Exposing yourself to alternative systems is absolutely crucial here. By traveling, you physically remove yourself from your locally curated environment. You break the physical bubble. Through education, you expand your mental framework way beyond whatever the algorithm decides to serve you today. And finally, with critical inquiry, you start constantly questioning the packaging of the so-called truths handed to you. This combination right here is how you seek higher truths beyond that curated frame.
Now, what's really interesting about this next part is the meta layer. Section 6, a sovereign diagnostic tool. Let's look at who actually published this text.
So you might assume everything we just talked about is some sort of traditional political critique, right? But the publisher explicitly states they are not affiliated with any government, political party, intelligence agency, or activist group, period. Instead, Dr. Melvin Sewell and by Bib Studio frame these ideas uniquely as a sovereign diagnostic tool. They author these materials as mythic infrastructure and a cinematic indictment specifically designed to expose ritualized containment and systemic erosion. So they aren't trying to push a political endorsement on you at all. Rather, they're providing diagnostic tools, what they actually call collapse protocols, to help you recognize the invisible walls of the simulation for yourself.
Which brings us to our final, lingering thought for today. Are we merely living in Psycho Venga's cryptic echo rift, born somewhere between slip flow and counterflow? Or is recognizing the simulation the first true step to actually escaping it? This material beautifully blurs the line between art, philosophy, and our own curated reality. But remember, recognizing the walls of the cave is the only way to eventually step outside. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning your reality, and always, always keep seeking the truth beyond the frame.